I always thought my life was like a quiet river, always following the same predictable course. But one day, I was taken by a current of sensations that took me to a place I never thought of exploring. It all started with George, my husband's best friend Tom. Tom is amazing. Don't understand me badly. A man of respect, affectionate, companion. But sometimes the heart likes to play hide and seek with reason. And then someone like George, always there, always present. Barbecues, gaming nights, tidying up that tap that the tone said to fix later. He was part of the furniture of the house. At least that's how I thought. Until, bum, do you know? That moment when the world stops. A touch that creeps. A look that crosses the soul. Small sparks that start a fire. That was exactly that. And suddenly, I was in a dangerous game between reason and desire. I knew I was stepping on a forbidden ground. But the problem? The more I tried to ignore, the more that game seemed to pull me close. One step forward, two backwards, and the question that devoured me. What was I willing to risk for something that made my heart fire? Well, hold there, because this story will let you jaw drop. George was not just the funny friend who illuminated the barbecues and meetings. He had that energy that made everything look more intense. And I always saw him as the older brother of Tom. Someone reliable, but without much brightness. Until that night, he was in the kitchen with me, talking while I was preparing dinner. It was such a banal scene, but the way he looked at me, it was as if to break me, a layer by layer, until he saw something that I didn't even know he was there. I shook my head, trying to ward off that thought. But after that, everything has changed. He was so subtle. The gestures, the quick touches on the shoulder, the time-consuming, the looks. They said what no word dare. And, do you know what is worse? For the first time I felt desired, in a different way. It was not love or an emotional connection. It was pure, raw, undeniable desire. And that woke up something in me. Something I didn't know I was numb. It was there that I realized. My coexistence with George would never be the same. And do you know what is crazy? I didn't even want it to be. That night, it was just a touch. A simple, almost innocent touch on my arm as he laughed at something I said. But let me tell you, it seemed that touch had fire. As if there was a secret message there, something that said more than the words could. After that, I couldn't get it out of my head. It was as if my mind is preaching pieces on me, forcing me to relive that moment, over and over. And the worst? Each time I thought, it seemed more intense. His way to speak, that smile he pulled out of me without effort. My God, he knew what he was doing. I knew exactly. It was as if we were playing a forbidden game, a game that none of us admitted to being playing. But that was happening right there. The eyes, the smiles, the gestures, all so loaded, so electric. And as much as I knew it was dangerous, there was a part of me that wanted more. I wanted to see how far it would. I tried to fool myself. Maybe he doesn't even realize the effect he has on me. But who did I want to fool? George knew. Oh, he knew very well. He realized every reaction, every look of mine that lasted a second more than he should. And I knew he felt the same. Even though none of us had the courage to open the game, the tension said it all. After that night, George seemed to be everywhere. If Tom went to work, there he was, fixing a lamp, having a coffee, or just there. I was trying to convince myself that it was coincidence, but deep down, I knew he got any excuse to be close. And look, every time he approached, the air was loaded. The tension between us was so dense that I could almost feel. It was like an invisible wire pulling us to each other, and I knew it was wrong. I knew it shouldn't. But at the same time, he couldn't avoid that cold in his spine each time he got close. It was a day he appeared while I was watering the plants in the garden. He stopped, leaned against the gate, and, with his smile, let out, "You know, Tom is lucky. He doesn't even imagine what he has at home." Then you imagine. My heart fired. My hand trembled. I smile, trying to disguise the nervousness. But inside, I was on fire. I knew this was escaping from my control. But there was a part of me, a part that I didn't even know existed, that I wanted to test the boundaries. I wanted to see how far George would have the courage to go, and perhaps find out how far I would have the courage to follow. It was a quiet night. Tom was out, traveling to work, and I took the silence to relax. But the universe had other plans. Suddenly, George appeared at the door, with a bottle of wine in his hand. and that smile full of intent that seemed to say 1,000 words. "I thought you could want company," he said, as who wanted nothing. I hesitated. Of course I hesitated. But deep down, I already knew it was going to let him in, and so I did. We sat in the room, opened the wine, and started talking. In the beginning, all normal, but soon, the weather changed. "You know you deserve more, right?" he let out of nowhere. I laughed, trying to disguise the nervousness. "But what?" I asked, pretending I didn't know where he wanted to go. He looked at me straight in the eye, with a seriousness that made my heart leap. Tom is a good face, but sometimes he doesn't realize the amazing woman he has by the side. These words, it was as if he knew exactly where to play. My heart shot, and I felt divided. Blame? Of course. But there was something there too. A sense of being seen, desired, valued in a way I had not felt for a long time. I knew I should stop that. That should send him away. But let's be honest, I couldn't. The conversation continued. The tension in the air only grew. But before anything went from the boundary, I got up and muttered something about being late. George understood the indirect and left. Only the damage was already done. After that night, nothing more seemed the same. From there, each meeting with George had a different load. Something more intense, more electrifying. I tried to avoid looking at him, but somehow our eyes always crossed. Always. There was an afternoon that he came to help me with a project in the backyard. Something silly, trivial, but the sun hitting the skin, the heat, and the proximity between us. Oh, that was something less trivial. We were there, side by side, when our hands touched. So light that no one would notice. But for me, it was like a shock. One of those who leaves us without air. He looked at me again, with his way. A look that seemed to say 1,000 things no one had the courage to say. "You know you don't have to do everything alone, right?" he said, with a low voice, almost a whisper. I smiled, trying to hide the mess he made inside me. And then there was that moment. He bent to adjust something, and I felt his breath so close that it seemed that the world had stopped. My whole body was tense. Every second seemed to last an eternity. That moment could have changed everything. But then, like a bucket of cold water, we hear the sound of the Tones' car entering the garage. It was as if the spell had been broken. The tension has disappeared, but the feeling was with me, stayed with me for a long time. I knew I was stepping on a dangerous territory, a path without return. But the more I tried to walk away, the more it seemed that something pulled me to him. So when George called me inviting dinner while Tom was out, my first reaction was to say no. But deep down, I already knew. Deep down, I was already saying yes. That night, I got ready as if it were any other day, but my heart knew it wasn't. I knew, and when I arrived, there he was, impeccable. The bottle of wine already open, the smile on your face, and that look that seemed to invade every corner of my defenses. He knew what he was doing. I knew. The conversation started light, words loose, nervous laughs, but each sentence carried something more, something none of us had the courage to say aloud, until he approached, letting the silence take over, and let out, "Did you never think about what could exist between us?" My mind stopped. It was as if time freezes. I knew. That was the point, the moment when everything could fall apart. I got up quickly, without looking at him. "George, this is not right." I love the tone. The words came out shaky but firm enough. He seemed to want to insist, but something contained him. As I went out, my heart fired. The tension between us was almost palpable, as if the air had become denser. I thought I had closed. I thought that would be the end. But no, George didn't give up. Days later, he appeared again. Only this time, bluntly, no filters. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said, with a low, hoarse voice. That intense look left me without air. No reaction. I tried to look away, but he continued, straight, without hesitation. "I know this is complicated, but we can't pretend. It is not happening. You feel too." My mind was a mess. I wanted to run, scream, disappear, but at the same time it was paralyzed. Each part of me seemed divided between guilt and desire. "George, you need to stop," I said, trying to sound firmly, but my voice betrayed me. He noticed. "I don't want to hurt you, not even Tom, but you are all I think. It's not just what could be among us. It's how you make me feel, alive." Those words, they hit me like a punch in the stomach. For a moment, just a moment, I allowed myself to imagine. What would it be like? Drop everything? Give in to what my body seemed to beg? But then, in an effort that I didn't even know I had, I took a deep breath, lifted my head, and said, "It won't happen, George." That phrase was an end point. At least that's what I expected. Because, at that moment, I knew that keeping playing with fire would not end well. The risk was too big, and I wasn't ready to burn everything around me. That night, when the tone came home, I hugged him as if he wanted to erase every piece of what had happened. It was as if that hug was my refuge, my attempt to go back to something safe. He looked at me, a little confused, and asked, "Is everything okay?" I smiled, even with a tight heart, and said, "Yes, I just needed it, just needed you." The next day, with the trembling fingers, I sent a message to George. Simple, straightforward. "This needs to stop. Please respect my decision." The knot in the throat almost prevented me from squeezing send, but I did, and it was not long before him answer. I understood. It was never my intention to hurt you. I knew he was sincere. He knew he was also fighting that. But honestly, this did not make things less complicated. During the weeks that followed, I did everything to avoid any situation he could be in. If he was going to appear, I would make up an excuse. It was painful, but necessary. Very necessary. Tom never knew anything. And do you know, he will never know. Some truths need not be said, especially when, in the end, the choice is already made. My choice was clear. Tom, the man I love, the one with whom I built a life. This was undoubtedly one of the most difficult decisions I ever made, but it was also the most important. Because in the midst of all the confusion, in the midst of all temptation, I realized what really mattered. I realized that desire can be tempting, overwhelming even, but it is never greater than the foundation of true love. Tom is my choice. He is the man with whom I built my story, and nothing, no one, will you change that. If there is something that this experience has taught me, it is that the lines between right and wrong may seem blurred when we are vulnerable, but in the end, we always know what is the right choice. You just need courage to follow her. I'm sharing this because I know that at some point, you may have faced a similar situation, those moments when reason and desire come into war. But listen, the important thing is to recognize our limits, learn from them, and above all, be faithful to who we are and what we choose. If you've been through something like this, or have an opinion about what you would do in this situation, leave it here in the comments. I really want to know how you see it all. And, of course, if you liked this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. We see each other in the next. Until then,